voluminous books, intimidating copies in this one. And yeah, I've been playing Billie Holiday there in the background, which I used for my previous video on Billie Holiday and John Paul Sartre, which is a duo that you never see coming. And since I placed two paintings in my previous videos, I just thought maybe this would be appropriate for this one. It's something really, I don't know, I find it poetic. I did it some years back. Anyway, today we'll be looking at Plato, the Republic. And this other one is the I need an assistant. Is the complete works of selected poems and prose of Percy Shelley. I think the complete works would be bigger than this, but I don't know, this is already big enough, really. So this video is about Plato's idea of kicking out poets from the Republic, his ideal Republic. I think on reading Plato, there's some other things that I agreed with him, some I didn't. But then also, it's not a book that should be really taken quite literally, Even him, I think he recognized in the end that his Republic is sort of a fantasy and it would be hard to come by, so you don't have to read it quite literally. But I think for me, the parts that I really didn't agree with him on are on his idea of kicking the poets out of the Republic. And he gives in the very end, not the very end, but approaching the end of the book, it gives this chapter of the book in discussing poetry and poets and the place of poems in his Republic. And so he tries to justify, his position about, poetry being dangerous somehow. But the thing is, at least he recognizes that it is a powerful medium. Maybe he's just afraid of it being misused in a way, and he thinks it doesn't really align with the moral standards of the Republic he dreams on. So I'll read a few passages from the Plato, and then I'll read Percy Shelley's defense for poetry. So he tries to counter Plato and try to bring back the poets to the ideal Republic of his own imagination, I guess. So I'll read Plato's sort of where he tries to make a case that poets and poetry is dangerous for his Republic. So, shall we classify all poets from Homer onwards as representatives of images of goodness and of everything else which occurs in their poetry, and claim that they don't have any contact with the truth? The facts are, as we said a short while ago, a painter creates an illusory shoemaker. When not only does he not understand anything of shoemaking, but his audience doesn't either. They just base their conclusion on the colors and shapes they can see. Yes, and I should think we'll say the same goes for a poet as well. He uses words and phrases to block in some of the colors of each area of expertise, although all he understands is how to represent things in a way which makes other superficial people who base their conclusions on the words they can hear think that he's written a very good poem about shoemaking or military command or whatever else it is that he sets to meter rhythm and music. It only takes these features to cast this powerful a spell, and that's what they're for. But when the poet's work is stripped of his musical use and expressed in plain words, I think you've seen what kind of impression it gives. So you know what I'm talking about. So that is just a small passage on trying to declaim poets and as the representers, and they say that they can misrepresent things, and because they're very passionate and sensualist, that he doesn't trust the people to be in control of their feelings when they are moved with poetry, and he thinks this can lead to some unethical behaviors or just improprieties that he doesn't really find conforming with his ideal standards. So then this book is annotated, so the editor kind of gives a short overview on Plato, sort of a rationale why Plato is making this case against poets. So it says, since poetry deals with appearances, it appeals to and fattens up the lower part of the mind, not the rational part. It makes us indulge in emotional feelings which hamper reason, even when we would not normally sanction those feelings. Reason uses measurement to combat some illusory appearances and calculation of benefit to combat unnecessary feeling. In short, poetry does nothing to establish an ordered, moral inner constitution, and if one is already established, it threatens to subvert it. Until or unless it can be proven that feelings foster philosophy rather than hinder it, we must be extremely wary of them. So, see there, Plato doesn't really trust feelings, and it can hamper reason, that is, but I didn't really agree with that position, being a poet myself. I think, it has an opportunity to do more good than harm, really, as we have seen throughout. Otherwise, if people would have picked up Plato's idea seriously, I guess there would have been quite fewer poets, but they go on, they keep on writing. They might not be as popular as back in the day, and not really actively participating in society sometimes, a bit sidelined and like private passions, but it's still alive. It's still an art form that lives on, and people still write, So let's see what Shelley says. So I think I'm going to read a longer passage of Shelley because I like to spend more time in making a case for poetry than the other way around. So this is what Shelley says in his defense of poetry. There are two defenses of poetry that I really love, and that is this one by Shelley, and the other one by Sir Philip Sidney. I think it's also a brilliant one, quite earlier than Shelley. But let's read what Shelley says in this. The whole objection, however, of immorality of poetry rests upon a misconception of the manner in which poetry acts to produce the moral improvement of man. Ethical science arranges the elements which poetry has created and propounds schemes and proposes examples of civil and domestic life. Nor is it for want of admirable doctrines that men hate, despise and censure and deceive and subjugate one another. But poetry acts in another and a diviner manner. It awakens and enlarges the mind itself by rendering it the receptacle of 1,000 unapprehended combinations of thought. Poetry lifts the veil from the hidden beauty of the world and makes familiar objects be as if they were not familiar. It reproduces all that it represents, and the impersonations clothed in its Elysium light stands thenceforward in the minds of those who have once contemplated them, as memorials of that gentle and exalted content which extends itself over all thoughts and actions with which it coexists. The great secret of morals is love, or a going out of our own nature, and an identification of ourselves with the beautiful which exists in thought, action, or person, not our own. A man, to be greatly good, must imagine intensely and comprehensively. He must put himself in the place of another and of many others. The pains and pleasures of his species must become his own. The great instrument of moral good is the imagination. The poetry administers to the effect by acting upon the cause. Poetry enlarges the circumference of the imagination by replenishing it with thoughts of ever new delight, which have the power of attracting and assimilating to their own nature all other thoughts, and which form new intervals and interstices, whose void forever craves fresh food. Poetry strengthens the faculty which is the organ of the moral nature of man, in the same manner as exercise strengthens a limb. A poet, therefore, would do ill to embody his own conceptions of right and wrong, which are usually those of his place and time, in his poetical creations, which participate in neither. By this assumption of the inferior office of interpreting the effect, in which perhaps after all he might acquit himself but imperfectly, he would resign a glory in a participation in the cause. There was little danger that Homer or any other eternal poets should have so far misunderstood themselves as to have abdicated this throne of their widest dominion. Those in whom the poetical faculty, though great, is less intense, as Euripides, Lucan, Tasso, Spenser, have frequently affected a moral aim, and the effect of their poetry is diminished in exact proportion to the degree in which they compel us to advert to this purpose. So, Shelley quite says it in great detail that, I don't think I would say it any better. And I like the end whereby he says the poets who tried to, restrict their poetic faculty to affect a moral aim, the effect of their poetry is diminished in exact proportion to the degree in which they compel us to advert to this purpose. And I've always sort of felt the same, like he says that the great poets, they speak what comes out of themselves, they don't force it, and this that comes out from themselves always stands out to have greater effect and for the greater good than when probably some force themselves to write for a cause in a way that is not natural, and to compel sort of a moral aim. So Shelley just says that poetry has always played various roles in society to and the place of the imagination, and the great instrument of moral good is the imagination. That's what he says, which is a very profound, there's a sort of sentences you underline when reading such a book. Let me read that again. The great instrument of moral good is the imagination, and poetry administers to the effect by acting upon the cause. So poetry enlarges the imagination, which is a source of a great moral good, according to Shelley. And this sort of debunks the Plato's assertion that poetry does the opposite. So for me, anybody who's going to make a good case in poetry and just, the apologists and the defenders of poetry, we'll always give them a listening ear. And like Dostoevsky said, beauty will save the world. Like and subscribe. Thank you.